annunciato stamattina, per chi non c'era lo ripeto, durante questo pomeriggio abbiamo previsto un momento di confronto e di incontro con Matthew Baldwin, responsabile della task force europea sull'housing, che interverrà con noi evidentemente da Bruxelles, in dialogo con Emily Clancy, che conoscete, vice sindaca di Bologna, che ha tra l'altro le deleghe anche alla casa alle politiche abitative, e che abbiamo diciamo, come dire, pensato per una serie di motivazioni che brevemente vi introdurrò. Just let me switch in English just to welcome Matthew Baldwin. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and we are glad that having you here. Just give me just 2 minutes to introduce you and the structure of the afternoon to the public in Italian, then we'll switch in English to giving you the floor. Ovviamente noi siamo molto contente e contenti di questo momento, perché, come è stato ribadito più volte stamattina, e quindi c'è anche un'evidenza di un'attualità, di un confronto con quello che Matthew Baldwin rappresenta, ovvero tutto un lavoro che in seno alla Commissione europea ha messo adesso la questione dell'abitare al centro di un interesse che si concretizza anche in una European Affordable Housing Plan di recentissima pubblicazione, e sulla quale probabilmente avremo il momento di introduzione di Matthew. La nostra programmazione di lavori prevede dunque un incontro con lui che evidentemente ci introdurrà alcuni contenuti più centrali di questo piano, cercando anche di corrispondere a delle questioni che sono anche un po' uscite nel dibattito di stamattina, delle questioni urgenti che riguardano l'abitare, che erano emerse sia a livello locale. Il sindaco Lepore aveva aperto anche con questa questione come un'esigenza di strumentazione operativa, e poi da quello che è uscito dal dibattito che ne è seguito sul rapporto, anche rispetto a alcuni temi di prospettiva, di postura, di politiche integrate per l'abitare. Quindi ringraziamo anche la vice sindaca Emily Clancy, perché questo dibattito con il suo intervento troverà probabilmente un radicamento ancora più approfondito rispetto a dei temi di politiche locali e di questioni che sulle nostre città diventano urgenti. So, I will give you, Matthew, the floor. Thank you very much again to accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours. You should be able to either to speak, either to make a presentation if you want. Thank you very much.
Grazie mille professoressa Marciucci, mi piace molto di invitare, è un grande onore per noi essere con voi oggi. Scusami, tanto italiano dei bambini, non funziona per discutere questo soggetto molto importante. So if I may switch to English, please interrupt and wave your hands if I speak fast, which can be the risk. It is such an honor to be with you in Urban the National Center for Studies in Urban Policies. I've heard so much about you. I don't think, met you before. I don't think it's a coincidence that you're doing such great work, from the fact that we see so many vibrant Italian cities engaging with us in the European Union on the vital issues facing us as a society. I had the honor in a previous life to run the 100 climate neutral cities project. And some of the Italian cities there took my breath away with their ambition and the scope for engagement and civic engagement, which is so crucial, and indeed is going to be part of the jigsaw puzzle of addressing the affordable housing crisis. So thank you very much for having us. I'm joined by Alessandro Coloccia, who confessed to me that Bologna is his favorite Italian city, which is nice. But we want to engage with you, and you've given us very tough questions, and I'm delighted to enter into the exchanges. And I'll try not to be too long in my presentation with Vice Mayor Clancy, it's a great honor to be with you. Look, if I may just then take a few minutes to present the plan. It's too late in the week to do PowerPoint, so I'm not going to do that to you. But I do want to talk through the origins of the plan, how we ended up here, and a little bit how we present it. But to anticipate your questions, it is not intended to be the final word on affordable housing at the level of the European Union. It is a start. It is a large stone that we are throwing into the pond, and we hope that the ripples extend for many years. Sorry, that metaphor may not translate easily into Italian, but we hope that the work we are triggering today, we can develop quickly the political momentum that we needed to go to the next stage. And all of our focus now is on implementation. Let me begin with a quote by our leading politician, President Ursula von der Leyen. A home is not just four walls and a roof, it is safety, it's warmth, it's a place for family and friends, it is about belonging. But for too many Europeans, home has become a source of anxiety. It can mean debt, it can mean uncertainty. So the thing that should make us most secure is making us most anxious. And I think you see that across the European Union. You see this, so I'm getting quite a big echo there, apologies, maybe I'll just reduce my microphone at this end a little bit. The sense that the issue has risen up the political agenda in Italy, of course, but pretty much in every member state. It's an issue which manifests itself, I think, principally, first and foremost, in urban areas, but there's a sharp and dangerous rural counterpart, of depopulation, and people living in houses they cannot afford to renovate, and often with negative equity. And so, for once, these sharp political movements has translated into, I think, very rapid political action at the European level. But I'd stress it is just the start. President von der Leyen threw her arms around the issue. She announced that there will be the first ever commissioner responsible for housing, Dan Johnson, who's also, by the way, responsible for energy, so he's quite a busy man. There is the first European Parliament Committee for Housing, chaired by someone you well may know, Irene Tignari, a very experienced MEP from Italy. We have the first task force trying to look in a coordinated way at the issue as it is impacting on so many different parts of European policies and vice versa. And we are trying to move at speed. One of the most shocking events for me sitting in this room 4 months ago was when the president suddenly announced that we had to bring out the plan already last year. So we had to change our plans, and we still managed, I think, to do a very substantial political outreach. Outreach, and we had more than 13,000 responses in our public consultation. And even more miraculously, we managed to bring a number of those issues into the heart of the plan. But there is this sense of urgency to get after the problem, whilst we have to recognize that some of the issues will take a very long time to resolve. We approach the plan with a modesty. We know that most of the legal competence lies with member states and with regions and with cities. There is very few things where the European Union can say, right, out of our way, we're going to come in and regulate this. That might be an advantage because it means we need to listen, we need to work with different parts of the governing system across Europe. We need to build consensus for action, but we are going to be, we're not going to try to rewrite the competence book. That will end them in a screaming stop, and we won't do anyone any favors. We are working with a number of different parts of the Commission, as I've mentioned. I've got an amazing task force, including secondis like Alessandro from the Italian banking community. We people working with us from all different parts, and this is our strength. And we're quite proud of the plan we put together at short notice. But we know that implementing it is going to be an even greater challenge. Just one or two crunchy numbers for you. We have this thing called Eurobarometer, which tests public opinion on a regular basis. And in answer to this question, in the place where you live, how much of a problem, if at all, do you think each of the following issues are? Lack of affordable housing, unemployment or a lack of job protection, lack of quality public services, poverty or homelessness. Housing, a clear winner, even given the social crises in some of those other areas, which I wouldn't want to pretend is minor. Affordable housing is top of the list, we just had a letter from the Irish Prime Minister saying it is the #1 issue for him. Even in towns and suburbs, those numbers are the same, little less so in the rural areas. So it is a massive issue facing citizens in our cities and on our built-up areas. We are working in two directions. We're trying to develop our own analysis, our quality of statistics and indicators at the same time as we're developing the policy. We are struck by, when we look at a number of the key housing indicators facing us, how misleading they can be if they're taken out of context. So, for example, average rents have grown by around 20% over the last decade, more or less. So where's the problem? This is about the same as average income growth. What we notice, though, when we dig down is that new rental contracts are substantially higher. Urban rental contracts are substantially higher. So we need to be wary of averages. We need to be respectful and recognizant of the divergence between member states and within member states. And in all of the pressure or stressed housing areas, which is something which has become very, very clear to us over the last year, it's urban and touristic areas which are particularly badly affected. Just one or two other numbers, paradoxically, at the same time we face this crisis, residential building permits are down by around 20% over the last 5 years. Now, I know that supply is not the only answer. If you talk to some economists, you might get that feeling. But there is a paradoxical problem at the same time as we're challenged to find places for our people to live. We are not adding to the supply. And of course, that's not just about new build. It means we're not being creative enough about getting up to vacant buildings. We're not doing enough to tackle the problem of repurposing buildings, the densification of building stock. By the way, all of the things that we need to deliver, if we're going to deliver climate neutrality in our cities, all of these things point in the same directions. 20% of our existing housing stock is not used to its full potential. 20% of our buildings are functionally vacant, including in Paris, which makes absolutely no sense. And the last number I wanted to throw at you, and again, it's not necessarily a true picture because we measure these things in different ways, and this is scandalous, is that we have more than 1 million homeless people across the European Union and more than 400,000 children affected. I won't go on a great moral speech, but that is just something we cannot accept in the European Union of 2025, and we are planning to get after it. Just quickly then on the plan itself, the package we brought out actually contains a number of elements. It contains some badly needed and overdue revised state aid rules on housing to give member states a bit more flexibility about how they invest. And I'm sure that's one of the things you'll want to talk about. So I'll pause on it now. There's a new European strategy for housing construction, again, both on renovation as well as new build, where the housing industry has had the least productivity gain of any sector in the European economy, including agriculture, over the last decade. And we also want to build on the new European Bauhaus. And they have come out with council recommendations, and they are devoting their festival this spring in June, one of the principal themes there is affordable housing. But it doesn't stop there. We will be coming in May with the anti-poverty strategy, which will detail the proposals for council recommendations on tackling housing exclusion and homelessness. We'll be coming with a citizens' energy package, which is going to dig down further into the problem of energy poverty. And that's important because if you think about the housing overburden rate, if you can't pay your bills, if you're in housing poverty, it doesn't matter whether that's because your rent's too high or because your gas bill is too high. We need to be supporting citizens faced by both factors. The plan itself has 4 pillars. We like our Greco-Romano constructions. The first pillar about boosting housing supply. The second about mobilizing investment. Let me jump to that because I think that's going to be very, very important in our future work. We need to mobilize additional public, but also additional private investment. At the moment, we're doing quite a lot of investment at the European level, around 43 billion euros of investment over the current funding period, which is good, but it's not nearly enough. So we're actually inviting member states to do more in the midterm review of cohesion funding, and Italy's really taken this up very seriously, I'm pleased to say. This could actually double the amount of money that's currently being spent on cohesion, up to around 15 billion. But we need to mobilize investment from all sources. The EIB is going to do its bit. One of the striking numbers when we talk to the national and promotional banking communities is that they are ready to bring across Europe 375 billion euros, and that's what they're planning to spend on social and sustainable and affordable housing over the next few years. Not all of that's going to be spent through the European Union, but it's a powerful signal of the firepower which can be brought, I think, to this issue by the banking community. And all of this is then about mobilizing, about triggering enough private investment to support these efforts. All of the public investment in the European Union, in national governments at the most utopian levels will never be enough to provide affordable housing for all of our people. We need to generate the support from the patient, responsible investors. It's not about encouraging irresponsible speculation into our markets. We've seen that a number of, not all, pension funds are looking for steady returns over time and are not looking to move capital in and out of the housing market, but to support projects for the longer term. And I think we need, and I'm happy to have this as part of our conversation, to find ways in which we can provide below market priced housing for broader groups of people. One of the manifestations of the housing crisis is that the teachers, the social care workers, the police, the firefighters who are not qualifying for social or what you would call, I always get this wrong, affordable housing in Italy, but they're not able to meet their needs in the market. So we've got to find ways of extending a hand to them as well. So the mobilizing investment part will be extremely important. We're also going to make this an important part of the European semester, which is going to be crucial to our efforts in terms of driving housing forward. But we're also ready to take immediate action where it's needed. We're going to go after the problem of short-term rentals. That's a commitment that the President has made. It's a high priority for my Commissioner. And we are keen to build out from that and not just address the range of issues which are driving the platforms, which are taking so much housing away from our city centres, but also to think in broader terms about an Affordable Housing Act to really help cities do what they're trying to achieve. And very happy to hear your thoughts on that. I mentioned speculation. We need to do more to establish the precise impact of speculation, but we know already that we need more transparency in our residential property market, so we'll be working with member states on that. And then if I could just quickly jump to the last pillar about protecting the most affected. We think there's much more that could be done to support housing for young people, for trainees, and also for students. Some people have criticized us for this, for talking about Erasmus Plus as a sort of an elite level education, but that's a circular argument. One of the reasons that Erasmus Plus is traditionally just about elite students is perhaps because the less advantaged people don't have access to it, because housing costs make it impossible. I'm hearing that anecdotally, and so we want to try to find ways of addressing the housing costs for the least advantaged people who want to educate themselves across Europe. And then last but not least, Action 10 focuses on the work which I think is the most morally essential, if you like, for getting after the problem of homelessness, supporting households and tenants in vulnerable situations. And I'm happy to say more about our precise plans there. Last comment, if I may, and then I stop. We want to find new ways of working together. It goes back to two things. One is our respect for competencies, and therefore we want to encourage member states and cities and regions and stakeholders to work more closely together to find out what the best way of getting after the problems is. We'll be doing this in a thing we call the Housing Alliance. We invite you, your partner universities, your partner cities to join us in these efforts. It's going to be structured around a work program. It's not just going to be one of those structures which we try to fill. We want to fill it with content. We want to fill it with passion and exchanges on the different ideas. and we'll be launching that during the course of this year. I mentioned already the Pan-European Investment Platform, which is a practical, hard-nosed effort to bring as much finance as we can into support. And the last thing I want to mention is the need to keep our political momentum. It's unusual that Europe steps into this topic and comes after it, I think, in such a directional way. That's because of the political forces. Us bureaucrats are reacting to that and trying to make the most of this. We need to keep that momentum this year. We need to keep the momentum through great movements like the Mayors for Housing, which features a number of Italian cities, including, of course, Bologna. We need to keep it through the informal housing ministerial meeting that will take place with all the housing ministers from across Europe in Cyprus in May. And we need to keep it through the Housing Summit, the first meeting of heads of state and government specifically on housing ever, which will take place in the middle of the year. And we need to really push leaders to give us the strongest commitments they can about the importance of this subject, and then through them to push the finance ministers to take public support for housing seriously in every member state, and to really use this consciously to leverage our future activities and make sure that we can not just talk about the plan, but implement it. And then last stop in terms of self-advertisement, and then I will stop. Please have a look at our website. There's a lot of material there, the plan in all languages, the staff working document, which contains a lot of critical analysis. So housing.ec.europa.eu for more about Europe's response to the housing crisis. So that's my quick overview. And I've already talked too much, and I'm very keen to hand over to hear more from the others. Grazie mille. Back to you.
Grazie. Thank you very much, Matthew. As you know, there is here the Deputy Mayor of Bologna, Emily Clancy, who is invited to maybe dialogue, of course, with you. Thank you very much for this overview. So, Emily, I'll leave you the floor, and then in case we continue with the other questions, if there are from the point of view of the report. But please, thank you.
Thanks so much for this meeting and occasion to dialogue again. It's such a pleasure. Maybe one thing that I want to underline right at the beginning is definitely something that we're happy about is that finally we're starting to talk about housing, taking it out of the housing emergency lexicon. We're talking about a structural housing crisis. And this is the only way that we can, if we really want to deal with, how profound the crisis is, and if we want to have a chance of beating it, it's absolutely important to talk about it in these terms. Why? It's very clear. It's already been said. More than 1 million people in Europe are homeless. And if we want to look at it in our countries, one piece of data that I think is very important is in Italy, over 5 million people are under the poverty line, like completely under the poverty line. And if we look at public housing, for example, in Bologna, but these numbers don't change in metropolitan cities in Italy. If I look at the last 3 years, who actually gained access to public housing? People who have less than 6,000 euro of income a year. This means way below the poverty line. These are the only people that are granted access to public housing. And we have thousands that would have all the criteria, but we simply don't have enough public housing to answer that demand. So maybe one of the things that we need to say is there has been a crisis of the housing model. And, for many years in Italy, as many European countries, especially after the 90s probably, we kind of, had the idea that the housing market had resolved itself. And there hasn't been structural public investment in that sector since the 90s. So one of the first things I think we need to think about is how we need structural investment and not episodic. So, there's very encouraging signs. The commissioner, the fact that there is a commission on housing, which we hope will, become permanent, maybe like what happened to the one on COVID. And the fact that we're starting to talk about housing in Europe, of course, but from the point of view of cities, definitely one of the major problems is since the 90s there hasn't been structural funds on housing. So, once in a while you'd be granted something, but that can only give you the possibility to, put together a project and not really program your structural policies. So what happened in the cities from the 90s to today is cities progressively sold their public housing because they had no way to maintain it. And with the money from selling that public housing, then they would restructure the rest and try to not keep it vacant and gradually assign that public housing. What's happened today in Bologna, which is one of the cities that has most public housing in Italy, we only have 6% of public housing. So that already gives you, the dimension of the phenomenon. We need structural funds so we can have, a programming of a new cycle of structural public housing. And this is, if you look at it over the decades, every time there's been structural lines of funding for public housing has gone up and it's had a bit of oxygen. Every time there hasn't been, then cities have sold their public housing, and this is why today, we're facing the biggest structural housing crisis that we've known so far. The offer is structurally unbalanced towards property. Every asset, every aid, every financial support has always been catered to becoming a property owner. And this speaks of injustice because years ago, decades ago in our cities, if you came from another country, if you came from a low-income family, you could still accede to public housing and maybe in the course of a generation emancipate yourself and your family and become a property owner. This is not true today. If you don't have generations of property owners in your own family, if you come from another country, if you come from a low-income family that has never been, has always rented, it's very difficult for you to become a property owner. And this speaks miles for the injustice that our cities are living in. We really have to address that. Also, we've seen it happening in all our cities. People who need help in finding housing for rent that is accessible, are not just the most fragile, are not just those people that I was talking about that are under the line of poverty. Now, as we were saying again, it's students, it's workers, it's everybody who makes the city run. And again, when we see that fragility isn't just very low incomes, but it's chewing on larger and larger sectors and fragments of our society, then really we're talking about housing is not just the right to have a home. It's also having a right to a job, to a healthy life, social relations. So really, we have to see housing as a social infrastructure and consider it in that aspect. Another thing that has been said, but I just wanted to underline, is the demand for housing has really changed over the years. It's more complex, it's more stratified, it's exponentially more. And instead, housing policies have remained the same. They are very rigid, and they are the same idea of policies as if we were still again in the 90s when they thought the system thought, okay, we don't need the public sector investing in housing anymore because there is no housing crisis anymore. So we really need to update that, and that's why it's really important that finally there's European framework that's working on that. Another thing is rent and how do we govern rent. It's crucial that we act on short-term rentals, and that's great that the European Union has taken steps already in the last few years on transparency and data, and now more so. I have to say there's a big imbalance between cities that in Europe can directly regulate short-term rentals on in any capacity, and cities that can only do so on an urban planning capacity, as Italian cities can do. We would need national legislation to instead put a limit on how many apartments you can have on short-term rental platforms, and this would be crucial. We've talked about it with our government. They're not interested in putting a limit on the number, so we kind of hope that Europe can help us, force our governments on this, because when you look at it in cities, it's, we can all see the difference between integrating your income, perhaps, using your home as short-term rentals were thought of as the beginning. You're renting your home, maybe one extra house that you have in that kind of capacity, and integrating your income. It's quite another thing if you are, building hundreds of apartments, or if you own hundreds of apartments, take them away from rent in that city and put them on a short-term rental platform. So we really need a limit on the number of apartments that can go on a short-term rental platform. Again, income taxation, how we can control rent with public agencies is something that we really hope to work more on. Some control on public-private partnerships. That's one of the things that the report underlines. How it can, of course, it can be a great direction, but you need a very strong control of the public if you don't want to see more exploitation and more extraction of rent and income in our cities. So that's just maybe a few points to start, the dialogue. Then I have more to say, of course, but I don't want to say too much all at the beginning.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad that in all discussions, some of the trigger points that also came up in discussion this morning that from the report are also, let's say, open up a discussion at another level, because some of the points that you underline as this issue of understanding housing as a complex and integrated let's say, material to discuss is something that it seems now taken for granted, but of course we think that how to do it in terms of tools and not just in terms of support is maybe an open discussion. So Matthew, if you agree, I give you again the floor, and thank
you very much. I'm so excited by the richness of the Deputy Mayor, the Vice Mayor's comments. So thank you very much for those. Congratulations, firstly, on the report. I think you've heard how bad my Italian is, so I can't pretend I've read it, but Alessandro has lapped up every word and has briefed me on it, and stresses the fact that you're giving it strong European content, and I appreciate that. And I'm sure it's not just because of the influence either of Annalisa Boni, my good friend, and greetings to her, as she's pushing these issues also from another angle. I so much agree with what you said about we have to kind of get out of this lexicon, Mrs. Clancy, of if it's a crisis and there's a lever we can just throw and then we address it. I think there's a lot in what you've said about the crisis of the housing model. We've debated in our team about whether we should be describing this as a market failure or indeed a policy failure, a collective policy failure to really, address the changing circumstances, adjust the changing demographic needs, and really come to terms with it. It will take, and I also appreciate in that it will take time to get right. I think politicians are always in a hurry, and rightly so, and expect immediate action and immediate results. And if we could turn this ship around, it will take a long time to deliver results, and that's very important. We hear you when you say you're concerned about the selling off of public housing. I grew up in the UK in the 1970s and 80s, where a flagship policy of the Thatcher government was to privatize what we call council housing. What I find very interesting now is that nowhere across the European Union are people saying, boy, I just wish we had a little less social or public or affordable housing. No, I just wish we had a few more luxury apartments. That's what we're really missing. And so how do we make that join? How do we make that connection? And of course, the answer is to try to make sure that structural investment into public housing systems, or let's call it publicly supported, state-supported public housing systems, is indeed not episodic. And if you look at the case of Ireland, they've been struggling with this, with a kind of a boom and bust phenomenon, even in relation to public housing supply. And there are some very interesting models centered around the revolving fund to keep public funding in when it's where it's intended to support the people who most need it. Sometimes if you edge towards cost-based funding models, you can actually, and then provide that with supplementary provisions for those most in need, you can sometimes stabilize the models, and I'm happy to look at that. I've been struck by, Alessandro's briefed me on all the numbers. I'm told not just in Bologna, across Italy, 350 to 650,000 people on the waiting list for edilizia residenziale pubblica, for income-based housing. That's an astonishing number. And equally astonishing to me, and this is a phenomenon I mentioned in my presentation, 65,000 empty dwellings because the lack of public funding for the basic renovations to bring them back into the affordable housing supply. Sometimes we get locked into this idea that we just have to build more. We actually need to look at the stock we have and bring it back into play, including in cities, of course. And I note that if you're at 6% public housing provision, Bologna, and that's one of the highest in Italy, that is below the European average. So there's a travel to go. I think I stop there. I just think you're hitting all the themes that we need to address in this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the detail. Thank you.
Just a second. Can you hear me? Yeah. Before giving again the floor to Emily Clancy, I would just to underline that this issue of understanding the several, let's say, possibility to work with this private relationship partnership that move from the private property to some tools that probably could be also, I don't know, taking in account in order to also to manage the investment, if you think to work in terms of investing. Also, as you underline, one of the pillars is calling for responsible investors. In the report, we underline this concept of claiming for public direction, regia pubblica. That is a conceptualization so strong, but practically we are looking for how these pillars could, in the following document, could be rooted in a way also to help the public to do the public. Thank you. Emily, maybe.
Sure. So another few questions is, of course, you touched on the fact that we have to use our existing public housing. I agree. In Bologna, we're on this program to reach zero vacancy within our term, so we're very excited about it.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And but one thing we're facing also is the renovation costs, of course, are so much higher than building new homes, of course, but that's also the other crisis that we're facing is the climate crisis. So we definitely need to renovate and not build when we can. But that's probably one of the issues is it's so expensive, especially in historical city centers where sometimes the assets are historical heritage and you have to renovate them to certain criteria to maintain that historical heritage, and that those costs are just exponentially higher than new buildings. So of course, again, the structural funding comes into play. One thing I know that you're working on this, but I'd like to know if you could stress a little bit more how you're going to address different contexts. Different European cities have, such huge differences in salary, and in housing condition and context. We have this quite old term that we use in Italy, which is alta tensione abitativa, and the ruling of the fact that some cities just have a sort of higher quota of housing crisis, a factor that can be measured compared to others. I know you're working on that territorially across Europe, so I just wanted to know if you could stress a bit more of how you're going to help us address the housing crisis dependent on how profound it is city to city. And another thing we haven't touched upon is, I guess, collaborative housing models, and just the fact that, again, since we have acknowledged housing as something that is also made of social relations, made of integration with social and health services, what a role it is to create those collaborative models, those intergenerational experiences, co-housings, and if we can stress that and touch upon how the fact that housing is also that social infrastructure, and if we don't think of it in that capacity, then again we're not really addressing the issue fully, I guess.
I slightly fear we're going to have to hunt around for things to disagree with each other on this conversation so far. Thank you for your nice words. Let me pick up the point about, we call it, and I don't know if it translates into Italian, the stressed areas of, and trying to address that. What was the phrase again in Italian?
Alta tensione abitativa.
Yeah, and we're not writing on a blank sheet of paper here. There's legislation in Italy, in Spain, in France to address this. And again, it gets to the point I made earlier about averages. If we just look even at cities overall, that you could conclude there isn't a problem to resolve. But as I know Bologna a bit, you can always see the squeeze on local people coming in from the pressures of tourism. Interestingly and trickily, actually, it's also coming from student pressures, of course, as well. And the last thing Bologna would want to do would be to start reducing its student population. But we've got to give tools. Sorry, we've got to give cities the tools to do this. One of the things I find, and I'm speaking a bit personally here, counterintuitive is that cities, mayors of big girls and boys, they know what the priorities are in their cities. In some cases, yes, you do want to encourage tourism. In other cases, you want to slow tourism down and you want to do other things. And so I think the thrust of our work is to try to give the responsibility back to member states and regions and cities to decide themselves where they want to put the priorities. It follows that it's not going to be what I like to call the long wagging finger of Brussels saying, you Bologna must do this, this, and this, and this. It is to enable Bologna to do what it needs to do to address its uniqueness. When I was working on the climate neutral city project, it was Bologna that came forward, in fact, and said, we want to run a project on how we manage exactly the point you were making, Emily, about dealing with renovation in a historic city center and how you can keep going on that and the high costs of that. And what you didn't mention is the true long-term cost is almost invariably met by renovation. It is just hard to amortize that in this horrible economic concept, amortize that in a short enough period to make it an economically attractive thing to do. We need to find models of getting after that. Whether it's, if I at my advanced stage went to the bank and said I want to get a loan to renovate my apartment, they probably wouldn't give it to me. They're saying you're not going to pay it back in your lifetime. So can we find ways of attaching the loans to properties themselves rather than to individual people? But just quickly on the housing stressed area, we will be, as part of this legislative initiative, developing the criteria for selecting what are stressed areas. It needs to be quite a long list of possibilities, so that, because again, to allow for different circumstances. And on the basis of that, that would trigger the ability of cities to do more in a more legally safe area. At the moment, we know that some cities are taking action against short-term rentals and are running up against the rules of the Services Directive. So we're trying to give more legal certainty for cities to act. And at the same time, we're calling it the Affordable Housing Act. We are really passionate to find ways of, aside from short-term rentals, helping cities address the crisis. And we're talking to the Mayors for Housing, which is this amazing group, talking to the smaller and medium-sized cities about their ideas as to how we can create real useful tools for developing affordable housing at the city level. I wish that could, up front, involve large dollops of direct finance from Brussels. And thank you, Emily, for being so polite and not mentioning that already. We know that's a problem in structural terms. We know that we are not able to do that directly, but let's look creatively at ways in the next MFF we can do more to empower action on this, including at the local level. But it will require a lot of work also with member states. Quickly on socially collaborative models, I think we're as keen to learn as much as to offer too many lessons here, but we totally agree on the need for co-housing models, co-living, intergenerational space. Also the notion that if you just focus on the housing itself, you miss the plot. You're not thinking about the essential services, whether it's medical or social or education or even commercial. If you go into Molenbeek in Brussels, you have to go miles to find a supermarket which sells decent and cheaply produced food. So it's about the full range of things that can be offered And we in Brussels are interested in trying to stimulate a European exchange on intergenerational fairness, which I think is also vital here. And in a student city like Bologna, there must be creative ways of helping them, young and elderly people like me, live in more harmony and driving better use of the health stock. And I'm very interested in ideas on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Non so se tu volevi dire qualcosa, se no gli chiedo just to thank you and to finish maybe this conversation. What's next? I mean, you told us now we had this plan that is published in December, if I'm not wrong, and as you know, there are some pillars, so we are waiting, of course, like you said, we are looking forward to the next kind of document, so just to ask what kind of, let's say, tools you are planning to put in working this direction that came from the pillars to finish. Thank you.
Well, Professor, so that's a terrifying question. But it's a very fair question. I think in Brussels we are often accused of being better at coming up with plans and actually implementing them. And I take that stinging criticism. It is easier to write a plan, an ambitious plan, than it is to implement it. And particularly when you're operating in there largely outside community competence. It means that we need to keep our modesty and keep our responsiveness in developing the implementation plan for the plan, which brings in, not just respect local competencies, but invites people into this model. We need to make the Housing Alliance a really exciting place to discuss ideas, to address the crisis. We need to make the Pan-European Investment Platform a really practical, nuts and bolts way of addressing crises. We will have a homelessness work stream in the Pan-European Investment Platform, which has never happened before. So really bringing that home, making the European Investment Bank, making the national and regional promotional banks think about how we can support local efforts to address homelessness. It means using the political momentum, which we know we have. We've had the discussion in the European Council, and people have said, this is a good thing, bring the plan forward, make it aggressive and fast-moving, whilst respecting competences. So we've got to use that, culminating in the Housing Summit, to really drive forward, drive the necessary finance packages to support affordable and sustainable housing across the European Union. In terms of the immediate priorities, my commissioner, if he were here, is very focused on 3 or 4 themes. The first, of course, is addressing the Affordable Housing Act and short-term rentals. He's pushing us to come forward as soon as possible this year with a strong set of proposals to bring that to the member states for discussion, and we have early legislative action. Of course, we need to respect the better regulation rules, so we'll be consulting, we'll be developing an impact assessment, and in this highly charged area, it's going to be very important. He's very keen for us to address the problems that I mentioned, speculation and financialization. And then more generally, we will be operationalizing, and watch this space and jump into it, please, on the Housing Alliance, on the Pan-European Investment Platform. I think you will continue to see strong European institutional interest. That's the other thing to watch out. The European Parliament's report is going to be voted in plenary in March. And Irena Tignali telling me the other day that we expect that draft to be on the table in early February. And if I just make one last comment to close our conversation, which I've really enjoyed, and I'm sorry for speaking so much in English. It's that if you look at something like the European Parliament, across the political spectrum, with the exception, I might say, of the extreme right, there is a determination to address the European affordable crisis. Of course, the solutions differ between the European People's Party and the S&D and the Greens and others, and there's an emphasis on different things, but there's quite a strong common ground that we can exploit. And I don't know if you noticed the other day, Donald Trump has started talking about the affordable housing crisis and coming with some quite interesting measures. The mayor of New York won election by campaigning on affordable housing. He was criticized for everything from being an extreme leftist to being an immigrant to being a Muslim, but no one criticized his policies on affordable housing. So we've got the momentum. We've got to get after this. We will regret it for the rest of our lives if we don't actually deliver joined up policies at the European and national and local efforts. So my last plea to you is a call for a common action on this, and let's work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Emily Clancy, for this conversation with us. And I don't know if you have some few minutes. Otherwise, I give you the floor to Gabriele Pasqui. Okay, if you have some few minutes, I just ask the public if there are few questions, and then non so se c'è qualche curiosità dal pubblico che possa essere urgente discutere. Sì, vieni. There is Professor Elena Marchigiani, who is one of the authors of the report. She wrote with Daniela Festa the chapter about agenzie sociali per l'affitto. Sì, social. Grazie.
Hi, good afternoon. I only wanted to ask you a bit more information because when you opened up your description of the plan, you were talking about revising the state aid mechanisms and so on. So I didn't quite understand what you were referring to. So if you were referring to public housing as a state aid, I don't think so, or if you were referring to other types of mechanisms. Thank you so much.
Grazie, Professoressa. It's a very good question, and I didn't spend enough time on it. We have state aid rules which apply to housing, pre-existing state aid rules, which enable member states without notification to spend, to invest on social, or in Italian speak, affordable housing. This is going to be very confusing. There were many calls from across Europe, from north and south, and I think across the political spectrum, to give member states more flexibility to invest, and particularly in the category of people who don't qualify for social, or in Italian speak, affordable housing, public housing. The teachers, the social care workers, the police are the obvious examples, but also people in the private sector, factory workers and so on, as the mismatch between rents and income levels in cities has become particularly acute. They weren't finding their needs in the market, but at the same time, it wasn't classical public or social housing, and therefore member states wanted to have more flexibility. The Commission has decided to grant that flexibility in the state aid's decision that was announced on the 16th of December, with a few important considerations. Firstly, we've strongly signaled we want this to mean more investment in housing, not less investment in social or public housing. That will be a shot in our own foot to do that, when we know from what the Vice Mayor was saying just how desperately needed is more investment in social housing. And we've also stressed, and this is the point that the Vice Mayor made, and I didn't pick it up, we know that cities are under such pressures that often they find themselves wishing to sell off public or social housing. And again, this is sometimes badly portrayed in the media, but often it's, if you want to build a hospital or you want to build that essential public transport connection, you have to generate the funds from somewhere. And so you sell off housing, which is generating, of course, a great return. But at the same time, that is very detrimental to our long-term housing needs. So we've in the Housing Task Force, we pushed for the stipulation for the norm to be that those funds stay in the public housing provision for 20 years and not to be shifted off to other priorities, and particularly not to be shifted off and sold off for luxury flat, which is so indeed not the plan. So we hope this is an important contribution. Again, it's been criticized a bit, particularly in France, for saying this could weaken social housing provision. Our appeal to member states is not to allow that to be the case. The funds are in your hands, and we just want to give you the more flexibility to address the people who have this need. I hope that's a bit clearer, Professor Rest.
She says yes, she's in the public again. Someone else? C'è qualche altra questione che avete, che muove dal dibattito di Matthew? No, I think that maybe you want to say some remarks on something.
Sorry, maybe just one last question. I really appreciate the fact that, of course, the stressed areas give, capacity to consider the context. And I know that you're working towards cities having flexibility because, of course, the context is different. But one thing I have to say politically is there are some countries, I think, Italy for sure, but we're not the only one, where there really is a struggle between the fact that cities are trying to, turn that ship around, as you were saying, and instead, let's say the housing plan is not on the top of the national agenda, to put it lightly. And so, something that is more, that forces our countries to work on housing more, rental caps, taxation on long vacant property, limits on numbers of apartments on short-term rentals, like something that has more, possibility for even the countries that aren't really tackling housing on the government side. I'm going to be very blatantly political. We would really benefit of a little nudge from Europe on that, in that direction. So just wondering if you could give us some hope.
Yeah. Emily, you're not the first person to raise this with me, and I get the problem. Have you been to Budapest recently? There are some serious issues here, and again, I think there will be some powerful politics at play here. It may well be that it is the member states, because of the way our legal systems work, that need to establish what are the criteria for establishing housing stressed areas. I don't want to pretend otherwise, but I mean, I think the virtue is that cities are occupying the key public spaces of member states. It is in their interests to help to help us find ways of addressing the stressed areas in particular. We will know more in the next few weeks about the member state reaction to the ideas we put forward. Generally speaking, it's been positive so far. We're going to keep up the level of ambition and keep up the exchanges with them. But at the end of the day, we can't only work within the system that we have, and the system at the moment we have is that we work predominantly with the member states. I am very proud of the number of initiatives that we in Europe have managed to launch with cities, and I feel the frustrations in not being able to do more, whether it's on direct financing or giving direct powers to cities to address the issues. And this is a kind of not an adequate response to your point, but I feel your pain. Let me put it that way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that conversation in general, Matthew.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thanks a million. Look forward to meeting in person. Cheers.
Thank you very much to have been with us. We can, the room is clapping you. So
well, I'm clapping you back for all of your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can close here the conversation with Matthew, and thank you very much. We probably will call you for other conversation during this year. We will discuss again the report, and probably we will have the occasion to work again and deeper to this kind of issue. And thank you for Emily Clancy to touching such points that are crucial. And I will give you the floor to Professor Gabriele Paschi, is in the President of Scientific Committee of Urbanit, for closing the day. Prego, Gabriele, vedi qua che almeno sei visibile. Grazie.
Grazie mille. Thank you. Ma parli in inglese o in italiano? Yeah, okay, yeah? Okay. So, thank you very much. This conversation and dialogue was really interesting. I start with an observation about the point of the momentum that was at the center of the speech this afternoon. I think that it's a real phase in which housing issues are at the core of the interest both at the European level and at the national level. But it is true that the way through which we build the definition of the problem is not always the same at the national and the European level. I think that one of the points is if housing can be considered a sort of pillar of a European social citizenship or not. This is, in my opinion, one of the points. And from this point of view, the question about the role of structural funds in the next years will be one of the most important points and questions. I want to underline that the 4 pillars of the plan have a lot of things in common with the issues and the questions that we discussed also this morning. Boosting housing supply, mobilize additional public and private investments, the theme of reforms, both through the regulation of short-term rentals and also through the instruments for contrasting speculations, and also this idea of the targeted population that is very relevant in the 4th pillar. I think that all these pillars are, in my opinion, good pillars. As usual, but you said the same thing. The point is how to cope with the implementation of these points that depend on many different issues, depend on the national legislative context, depend on the resources that at the national level, at the regional level, at the EU level could be used to implement the plan and so on and so forth. I think that there are also some potential trade-offs in this kind of plan and in the implementation of this kind of plan. I quote a couple of questions that for me are relevant and have something to do also with the discussion we had this morning. First, for sure, housing is a public problem that is multiscalar. So it's relevant to imagine a governance of the problem that is able to connect the EU dimension, the national dimension, the regional dimension that in Italy is very important for this issue, and also the local ones with the role of municipalities and so on and so forth. And this means that we should be able to identify general principles and also general rules, also at the European level, but to differentiate a lot the solutions, the specific planning tools, the specific policy tools, because problems and solutions are really different in different contexts, in different regions. Housing issues are not the same in Milan and I don't know, in Catanzaro, in Italy, obviously. So, this is the first point. How to guarantee some general principles on one side, but to be able to differentiate the specific policy tools and policy issues at the local level. Also, with the idea of making value of the experiences that in specific places, cities, contexts, have been experimented in the last years. So this is the first point. Second point is the issue of public housing and social housing that we have discussed this morning also. On one side, it's clear that some of the social housing approaches through the mobilization of private resources are for many different reasons crucial. But on the other side, we have said this morning that we need a lot of investments on public housing, on the existing public housing. So I think that this is one of the most important questions, because it's true that the resources are limited in some sense. So which are the most important focus points? Those of experimenting new forms of social housing, mobilizing also private investments, or to focus on the existing public housing. So I think that this is one of the most important points. The other aspect that have been discussed also this afternoon is, for sure, also in the European plan, there is the idea of boosting housing supply, so to produce new houses, new homes. But on the other side, I think that the idea of the reuse of the existing housing it's really relevant. And from this point of view, I think that also the issue of the rent extraction, especially in the core of the cities, is one of the most important questions. The last point that I want to underline is that I think that if we reflect on the role of Europeization of urban policies in the last 20 years, we have in mind that Europeization was very relevant for local experimentation, also in Italy. We had a season in which the European rules, but also the European fundings and the European models were relevant for changing something also in Italy. Some of the most relevant, interesting, important experimentation in Italy were based on this idea of European urban policies. I think that also for housing policies, that was not one of the main issues of the European Commission in the last years, could be another field of experimentation. So it's relevant that the European Commission is able to support with funding, support with regulation, for sure. For example, I expect the regulation of short-term rentals because it should be crucial for Italian cities. But on the other side, I think that also supporting experimentations, it's a very relevant point. Supporting what is going on in our cities, what is interesting, through knowledge, through not only financial support, but also other kind of support that can help to boosting this kind of experiences that have going on in the last years. The very last point that I want to underline is that from this point of view, I think that really our report this year is a report that we have to use in the next months in many different ways. Going on with this kind of discussion at different levels, also with the EU if we are able, but at the national level, at the regional level, at the local level, and also engaging other kind of actors that are crucial actors for this field of policies. This morning we had the example of the unions, of social housing initiatives, of local organizations and so on and so forth, but also ANCE and so on and so forth. So I think that we have to discuss the report with this big network of actors that are not only institutional ones. This is one of the main points. This means also different forms of discussions, not only the presentation, but also more small groups discussion with some kind of local actors, merging also different kind of actors in our cities. I think that we have a lot to do in the next months, and I think really that the report that I have appreciated so much could be a good tool for Urbanit to be able to produce some kind of usable knowledge for the institutions and for the other stakeholders that have a big challenge in the next months about this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Gabriele Pasqui. we can say that we can conclude the afternoon right now. Thank you for all of you to be part of the discussion. Thank you again, Matthew Baldwin, to stay with us until the conclusion of this afternoon. And thank you very much. Grazie a tutti e a tutte e ci vediamo nelle prossime discussioni operative del rapporto. Mi permetto di dire questo adesso. Grazie.